Beaten for being stupid, K9 German Shepherd pup couldn't turn his head without shaking. Some old men just don't know when to leave things alone, Haas. Klaus Richter sneered, his voice a low growl as he confronted Wilhelm outside the courthouse. That mutt of yours should have been forgotten. But Fritz's story wasn't forgotten. To hear how courage and compassion triumphed over cruelty, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and listen to the full incredible journey of Wilhelm and Fritz. The stench hit him first. A noxious blend of stale beer, overflowing bins, and something acrid metallic. Wilhelm Haas, 72 years of dignity and routine, faltered in his nightly constitutional with Gustav, his aging dachshund. It was just past 10, the Hamburg air thick with a damp chill that promised a bitter winter. This particular alley, a narrow cut-through between a disused fish market and a row of shuttered warehouses on the city's industrial fringe, was usually avoided, but Gustav, with the obstinate nose of his breed, had tugged him this way. Then came the sound, sharp and sickeningly distinct. Above the distant hum of the port, a high-pitched yelp choked off mid-cry, followed by a dull, repetitive thwack, thwack, thwack. Wilhelm froze his hand, tightening on Gustav's leash. Another sound sliced the night. A guttural human roar, words lost in fury, but the intent chillingly clear. Dummer Hund lernst du es nie, stupid dog? Will you never learn? Wilhelm's heart hammered against his ribs. He was no hero, just an old man who liked his peace. But the thuds continued, punctuated by whimpers so faint they were almost swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed each blow. He took a hesitant step forward, peering into the deeper gloom of the alley. Silhouettes shifted. A large, dark shape hunched, a smaller one cowering, an arm raised, then falling. Suddenly, headlights flared at the alley's far end. A van, dark and unmarked, revved its engine impatiently. The larger silhouette straightened, kicked something dismissively, then merged with the shadows toward the vehicle. Doors slammed. The van lurched forward, its tires spitting gravel, and sped away, leaving only the lingering scent of exhaust fumes and a profound, echoing silence. Wilhelm waited, his breath held captive in his chest, until the red taillights vanished. Gustav whined, pressing against his legs. Slowly, cautiously, Wilhelm moved forward, his old bones protesting. The metallic tang was stronger here, and now he could see a crumpled heap near a rusted skip. It was a German Shepherd puppy, no more than 6 or 7 months old, its black and tan fur matted with something dark and wet. It lay unnaturally still. As Wilhelm knelt, his knees cracking, the puppy twitched. A low, agonized moan escaped its throat. It tried to lift its head to look at him, but the movement was a horrifying, spastic jerk, its entire body convulsing, its neck muscles cording visibly. Its eyes, when they finally found his, were wide with an ancient, uncomprehending terror. Each tiny attempted movement of its head was accompanied by that violent, uncontrollable shaking. Wilhelm's breath hitched. Mein Gott, he whispered, the cold air burning his lungs. What have they done to you? The pup just shivered, a broken thing in a brutal world, unable to even turn its head without its small frame being racked by tremors. The urgent need to act, to save, to somehow push back against the darkness that had just unfolded, pulsed through Wilhelm with an intensity that belied his years. This couldn't be the end for this small life. It just couldn't. Wilhelm Haas was a man of quiet habits and deep affections, largely unshared in a world that had steadily outpaced him. A retired electrical engineer, Widowed for a decade, his life in the modest Hamburg apartment revolved around precise routines: the morning paper with black coffee, the meticulous tending of his small balcony garden, the twice-daily walks with Gustav, and the evenings spent with well-worn books or the crackle of the radio. Gustav, a cantankerous but devoted 13-year-old dachshund with a gray muzzle and mournful eyes, was his constant furry shadow, a responsibility Wilhelm cherished. He'd always had a soft spot for dogs, admiring their uncomplicated loyalty, a stark contrast to the often bewildering complexities of human interaction. His own father had been a policeman, and Wilhelm had grown up with the steady presence of working German Shepherd's dogs of intelligence and discipline, embodying a nobility he deeply respected. The sight of the brutalized puppy in the alley had shattered his carefully constructed peace. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the calculated callousness, the designation of a living being as stupid and therefore worthy of such torment. Gently talking in low, soothing tones he usually reserved for Gustav. When thunder rumbled, Wilhelm managed to coax the trembling pup into allowing a closer inspection. There were no obvious gaping wounds, but the way the puppy flinched from the lightest touch, the terrifying rigidity and subsequent shaking of its neck spoke of profound internal trauma. He unbuttoned his old loden coat, its familiar woolen scent, a small offering of comfort, and carefully, painstakingly eased the puppy into its folds. It was surprisingly light, a bundle of sharp bones and terrified quivers. He named him right then and there Fritz, a strong traditional name, a small anchor of hope. Carrying Fritz, and with Gustav trotting anxiously beside him, Wilhelm hurried through the deserted streets, his mind racing. He knew where to go. Frau Dr. Elke Vogel, his trusted veterinarian for years, ran a small clinic not far from his apartment. He prayed she was still there or would answer an emergency call. The clinic lights were on a beacon in the late hour. Elke, a woman whose pragmatic kindness Wilhelm had always appreciated, was just preparing to leave. Her expression, usually a mixture of professional concern and warm familiarity, shifted to one of shock as Wilhelm carefully laid Fritz, still wrapped in the coat, onto the examination table. Wilhelm, what on earth? As he recounted the grim discovery, Elke's face grew taut. Her examination of Fritz was gentle but thorough, her fingers probing with an expert touch that still made the puppy flinch and emit tiny, distressed whimpers. The shaking in its neck was more pronounced under the clinic lights. Elke x-rayed Fritz's neck and spine, her silence heavy. Finally, she turned to Wilhelm, her eyes clouded with a mixture of pity and anger. "The physical trauma is severe, Wilhelm," she said, her voice low. "Multiple contusions, deep bruising all along his back and flanks. His neck, there's significant soft tissue damage, possibly some microfractures in the cervical vertebrae, consistent with being violently choked or repeatedly jerked by a chain or collar. The shaking is a neurological response to the trauma, possibly a concussion as well. He's dehydrated, malnourished." She paused, then added grimly, "This wasn't a one-time event. These are injuries sustained over time, culminating in something acute tonight." Wilhelm felt a cold fury rise within him, a feeling so intense it was almost unfamiliar. The man, he called him stupid dog, he choked out. Elke nodded slowly. "There are places." She began choosing her words carefully. "Training facilities that promise quick results, especially for working breeds or difficult dogs. Some use methods that are medieval. They break a dog's spirit, not train it. And when a dog doesn't conform or is deemed stupid, she didn't need to finish. The inciting incident bloomed in Wilhelm's chest, hot and insistent. Looking at Fritz, whose terrified eyes were still fixed on him, a flicker of something. Trust, a desperate plea. In their depths, Wilhelm knew he couldn't just take this puppy home and forget the horror. The image of the dark van, the brutal silhouette, the dismissive kick. It was seared into his mind. This wasn't just about Fritz anymore. It was about the inherent wrongness of it, the silent suffering of other animals that might be enduring the same fate. Elke, he said, his voice surprisingly firm. We have to do something. I saw a van. I know roughly where it happened. Someone has to be accountable for this. He looked at the small, broken creature on the table. He deserves justice. They all do. His initial goal was clear burning, with a quiet intensity find who did this to Fritz and ensure they couldn't inflict such cruelty on another living soul. The long, dormant engineer in him, the man who believed in systems and accountability, stirred. The memory of his father's disciplined shepherd symbols of service and protection contrasted sharply with Fritz's violated innocence. This was a debt that needed to be paid. The days that followed Fritz's rescue were a blur of cautious care and simmering anger for Wilhelm. Fritz's recovery was agonizingly slow. He ate, little flinched at sudden movements, and the violent shaking in his neck, though gradually lessening in intensity, remained a distressing constant whenever he tried to look around. Wilhelm converted a corner of his living room into a soft den, spending hours just sitting with the pup, talking softly, offering small morsels of chicken by hand. Gustav, after initial olfactory investigations and a few jealous grumbles, seemed to adopt a protective air, often lying near Fritz's bed as a silent furry sentinel. Wilhelm's mind, however, was far from peaceful. He replayed the events of that night endlessly. The alley, the warehouse district, the fleeting glimpse of the van. He began his own quiet investigation, a methodical process, honed by decades of meticulous engineering work. He revisited the alley by daylight, sketching the layout, noting the businesses, mostly import-export storage, a tire depot, and a large nondescript warehouse at the far end with unusually high fences and no company signage. No CCTV cameras seemed to cover the exact spot of the dumping. He started walking Gustav in that industrial area, feigning casual interest, chatting with truck drivers on their breaks, a grumpy security guard at a logistics firm, the woman who ran the Greasy Spoon Cafe nearby. He learned little of substance, just vague comments about a dog place further down, one that was a bit rough and kept to itself. The name Schwartz K9 Tactical eventually surfaced, mentioned with a mixture of respect for their tough dogs and unease about their methods. Their website was sleek, professional, showcasing impressive German shepherds in various states of controlled aggression or perfect obedience. They offered protection training, sport work, and, tellingly, advanced behavioral rectification. Testimonials were glowing but oddly anonymous. Wilhelm felt a knot of certainty tighten in his stomach. He knew he needed more than just a hunch. He needed help. He thought of Greta Schiller. Years ago, his late wife Martha had volunteered briefly for a small animal welfare organization, Hamburg Animal Voice, and Greta had been its fiercely dedicated, if somewhat abrasive, driving force. He found the number and called. Greta When they met in a small, cluttered office overflowing with pamphlets and images of rescued animals, was much as he remembered: sharp eyes, a no-nonsense demeanor, and an aura of weary cynicism battling an unyielding passion. She listened to Wilhelm's story, her expression hardening as he described Fritz's condition and his suspicions about Schwarz K9. "Schwarz K9," she said, tapping a pen against a chipped mug. "Run by a man named Klaus Richter. Ex-military, fancies himself some kind of dog whisperer, but the whispers we hear are usually about e-collars cranked to the max and choke chains used as nooses. We've had anonymous complaints before. Dogs returned injured, psychologically damaged. But Richter's smart. He gets waivers signed, has NDAs for his staff. Everything looks legitimate on paper. We've never had enough for the authorities to act." Wilhelm's quiet determination seemed to impress her. "This puppy Fritz, he could be the key if we can definitively link his injuries to Schwarz K9. They decided to work together. Greta had the contacts, understood the labyrinthine bureaucracy, and knew how to gather information that could potentially stand up. Wilhelm had the first-hand account, the moral outrage, and as it turned out, a surprising knack for observation. Their initial efforts were frustrating. Surveillance of Schwarz K9 from a distance yielded little beyond glimpses of dogs being run through drills in a fenced compound. The place was secure, almost fortress-like. Greta's official inquiries about licenses and inspection reports hit predictable walls. Schwarz K9 was on the surface compliant. Wilhelm, trying to pose as a potential client interested in behavioral rectification for a fictitious, unruly shepherd, was met by Richter himself, a physically imposing man with cold, assessing eyes. Richter gave him a carefully curated tour of the public areas, showed off a few impeccably trained dogs, and expertly sidestepped Wilhelm's attempts to see the kennels or discuss specific training methods for stubborn animals. Wilhelm left feeling scrutinized and deeply uneasy, certain Richter was hiding something. A few days later, Wilhelm found a note tucked under his apartment door. "Old men should mind their own business. Some dogs are best left alone." No signature. It was a clear warning. Klaus Richter, or someone connected to him, knew he was poking around. The stakes had just been raised. Fritz, sensing Wilhelm's agitation, whimpered and nudged his hand, the ever-present tremor in its neck, a stark reminder of what they were fighting against. Wilhelm's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protection for Fritz, for himself, and for the other silent victims. He wouldn't be intimidated. The anonymous threat, rather than deterring Wilhelm, solidified his alliance with Greta. It was proof they were touching a nerve. But they were still missing the crucial piece: concrete evidence linking Fritz's specific abuse or any ongoing abuse directly to Klaus Richter and Schwarz K9. Weeks turned into a frustrating month. Fritz was slowly gaining weight, the terror in his eyes receding, replaced by a cautious curiosity, especially towards Wilhelm. The neck tremors persisted, particularly when he was tired or stressed, a permanent physical scar. Greta, leveraging her network, put out discreet feelers for any former employees of Schwarz K9. It was a long shot. Richter likely ensured loyalty through fear or tightly worded contracts. But then a tentative email arrived in Hamburg Animal Voice's inbox. The sender was anonymous, expressing unease about training practices at a certain Hamburg K9 facility and asking if there was anyone they could talk to completely off the record. Greta and Wilhelm arranged to meet the sender in a neutral public place, a quiet corner of the Planten und Blumen Park. A young man approached them, pale and nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. He introduced himself as Leo Meyer, a former kennel hand at Schwartz K9. He'd quit 3 weeks prior, unable to stomach what he'd witnessed. Leo was barely 20, clearly troubled. "I needed the job," he mumbled, his voice low. "But what they do there, it's not training, it's breaking them." Wilhelm, sensing the young man's fear and his underlying decency, spoke gently, not of investigation, but of Fritz, describing the puppy he'd found, the state he was in, the label of stupid that had nearly cost him his life. He showed Leo a picture of Fritz on his phone taken a few days earlier, a hesitant, hopeful look in the pup's eyes. Leo stared at the photo, his own eyes welling up. I remember him," he whispered, his voice cracking. A new intake, a bit headstrong but smart, eager. Richter, he lost his temper with him, said he was defiant, unteachable, stupid. I saw him, Richter, with a heavy lead, and later in one of the back kennels. The pup was like that. He gestured vaguely towards his own neck, his face ashen. Richter said he was disposing of him because he was useless. Leo hadn't seen Fritz being dumped, but he knew Richter had taken him away in the unmarked black van late one evening in a towering rage shortly before Wilhelm had found him. This was it, the direct link. Leo went on to describe the systematic cruelty at Schwartz K9, the soundproofed room where particularly brutal corrections took place, the excessive use of prong collars and high-powered e-collars, often on dogs that were simply confused or frightened, the philosophy driven by Richter that absolute dominance and punishment were the only ways to ensure reliability in a working dog. The stupid label was, as Wilhelm had intuited, a condemnation marking a dog for either brutalization until it submitted or quiet disposal if it didn't break quickly enough. Leo had even on a couple of occasions managed to take short, blurry photos on his phone of injuries on dogs or the harsh equipment laid out, not conclusive on their own, but powerfully corroborative. This was the midpoint, turning point. Leo's testimony, his willingness to potentially provide a formal statement and share his clandestine photos, changed everything. Wilhelm and Greta exchanged a look. They now had a credible insider witness. Their objective sharpened, moving from a somewhat nebulous quest for information to a focused campaign, expose Schwartz K9, and bring Klaus Richter to justice. They were no longer just reacting to Fritz's abuse, they were proactively building a case. Greta gently explained to Leo the importance of his testimony. "You could help save other dogs, Leo," she said. Leo, visibly wrestling with his fear, looked at Wilhelm, at the quiet, unwavering resolve in the old man's eyes. He thought of Fritz and the other dogs still trapped. He nodded slowly. "I'll do it," he said, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "I'll tell them what I saw." They knew Klaus Richter would not react well if he discovered a former employee was talking. The risk had significantly escalated. There was no turning back now. The fight for Fritz had become a fight for many. Wilhelm felt a strange mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. He was an old man, thrust into a dangerous game, but looking at the trust in Fritz's eyes when he returned home that evening, he knew he couldn't have chosen any other path. With Leo Meyer's hesitant agreement to testify, a new, more perilous phase of their investigation began. Greta, energized by the breakthrough, approached a contact she had within the Hamburg Police Department, Detective Criminal Hauptkommissar Eva Müller, a woman known for her tenacity and, crucially, her own love for animals. Müller listened patiently to Greta's presentation of Leo's potential testimony and Wilhelm's account, reviewing the blurry photos Leo had supplied. She was sympathetic, visibly disturbed by the allegations. "This is serious, Frau Schiller, Herr Haas," Müller said, her expression grave. "Leo's statement, if he holds firm, is a significant step. But Richter is well connected and legally savvy. His facility has passed basic inspections, even if they were likely cursory. To get a warrant to raid Schwartz K9, we'll need more than past accounts, however harrowing. We need evidence of ongoing abuse, something current and irrefutable." This brought a new set of challenges. Leo understandably became increasingly anxious. The thought of formally accusing Klaus Richter, a man he clearly feared, made him physically ill. He started missing scheduled calls with Greta. Wilhelm, recognizing the young man's terror, took it upon himself to be Leo's main point of contact. He didn't pressure. Instead, he talked about Fritz's progress, the small victories. The first time Fritz had tentatively played with a ball, the way his tail now gave a hopeful thump when Wilhelm entered the room. He spoke of courage, not as the absence of fear, but as acting in spite of it. Slowly, he coaxed Leo back from the brink, reassuring him that he wouldn't be alone. The dark night of the soul wasn't just Leo's. Wilhelm, too, felt the weight of their undertaking. Sleepless nights were spent worrying about Leo's safety, about the possibility of failure, about the malevolent force that was Klaus Richter. Gustav would often nudge his hand in the dark, a comforting presence, while Fritz, now sleeping at the foot of Wilhelm's bed, would sigh softly in his sleep, his neck still giving an occasional involuntary twitch. The team, Wilhelm, Greta, and now cautiously Detective Müller, in an advisory capacity, brainstormed how to get the current evidence Müller needed. Sending Leo back in was out of the question. It was too dangerous. They needed eyes and ears inside Schwartz K9, or a way to document the conditions without Richter's knowledge. Greta discovered that Schwartz K9 was planning an open house and capabilities demonstration in a few weeks, designed to attract wealthy clients looking for elite protection dogs, or to enroll their high-value animals in Richter's exclusive training programs. This was their chance. Richter would be on his best behavior, but it was an opportunity to get someone inside legally. "I can go," Greta volunteered. "I can pose as a prospective client, a wealthy widow looking for personal protection. I can wear a hidden camera." Wilhelm, remembering Richter's cold, assessing gaze, felt a chill. "It's risky, Greta. He's sharp." "It's our best shot," she insisted. Detective Müller, while unable to officially sanction such an operation, provided discreet advice on the type of camera that might be effective and difficult to detect, and emphasized the need for extreme caution. While Greta prepared her cover story, Wilhelm had an idea. He'd noticed from his earlier casual observations that there was a smaller, more isolated outbuilding at the rear of the Schwartz K9 compound, less visible from the main road. He remembered Leo mentioning it as a place where problem dogs were sometimes taken for intensive sessions. In the days leading up to the open house, Wilhelm, looking like any other elderly man out for a stroll with his dog, began walking Gustav along a public footpath that ran adjacent to the woods bordering the back of the Schwartz K9 property. From a carefully chosen spot partially obscured by trees, he could just see that outbuilding. He started noticing a pattern. Late in the evenings, after most of the staff had seemingly left Richter's black van, would sometimes drive around to this outbuilding. On 2 occasions, Wilhelm heard the distinct, distressed barking of a dog, followed by muffled, angry shouts, and then a chilling silence. He couldn't see anything clearly, but his gut churned. He reported his observations to Greta and Miller. It wasn't solid evidence, but it reinforced their focus on Richter himself and that particular outbuilding. Tension coiled tighter as the open house approached. Greta practiced her role, chose her attire carefully. The hidden camera was tested repeatedly. They knew this might be their only chance. If it failed, or if Greta was discovered, Richter would be alerted, and any chance of exposing him could be lost. Leo, though still nervous, was now resolute, ready to give his official statement the moment they had something more. Fritz, oblivious to the dangerous current swirling around his human companions, nudged Wilhelm's hand, his tail giving a soft thump. That slight tremor in his neck was a constant silent prod, urging Wilhelm onward. The old engineer felt a surge of protective resolve. He would not let Fritz or any other dog suffer in vain. The day of the Schwartz K9 open house dawned gray and oppressive. Greta, impeccably dressed as Frau Helga Weber, a recently widowed heiress with a penchant for diamond solitaires and a purported fear of the city's rising crime rate, exuded an air of nervous wealth. The tiny camera lens disguised as an ornate button on her silk blouse felt like a burning coal against her skin. Wilhelm, after a restless night, drove to a prearranged spot near the woods, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, his only companion besides Gustav, who whined softly in the passenger seat. Detective Miller and a small plainclothes team were on standby several streets away, ready to move if Greta gave a prearranged distress signal, or ideally a signal that she had obtained definitive evidence. Inside Schwartz K9, Klaus Richter was in his element, urbane, charming, and utterly in control. He guided the select group of potential clients through the pristine main training halls, showcasing dogs that performed with chilling, robotic precision. Greta, playing her role, asked seemingly naive questions, her camera silently recording Richter's smooth reassurances, the sterile environment, the perfectly obedient dogs. But it was all too perfect, too sanitized. This wasn't where the real rectification happened. From his vantage point, Wilhelm watched the main compound. His attention, however, was fixed on the isolated outbuilding. Around mid-morning, during a refreshment break for the guests, Wilhelm saw Richter, his charming facade briefly slipping into a frown of irritation, speak sharply to one of his trainers. The trainer then led a struggling, agitated Malinois, clearly not one of the demonstration dogs, towards the rear outbuilding. Richter followed a few moments later, his movements clipped and angry. Wilhelm's heart lurched. This was it. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers stiff with cold and anxiety. "Greta," he whispered into the burner phone they used for secure communication. "Richter, outbuilding, with a Malinois, now." Greta, mingling near the refreshment table, subtly acknowledged the call, excusing herself with a fluttery comment about needing some air. she began a seemingly aimless stroll towards the less manicured rear of the compound, her path artfully designed to bring her closer to the outbuilding Wilhelm had identified. She could hear faint, stressed yelps. As she neared, the yelps turned into choked cries punctuated by Richter's furious, muffled shouts. Unnützer Köter! Ich zeig's dir, useless cur! I'll show you! Through a grimy, cracked window pane of the outbuilding, Greta caught a horrifying glimpse. Richter, his face contorted in rage, had the Malinois hoisted by its choke chain, the dog's paws scrabbling uselessly in the air. He struck the dog sharply with a short-weighted crop. Her camera was rolling, capturing the sounds. Suddenly, Richter's head snapped up. Had he heard a twig snap under Greta's foot? Seen a reflection, he barked an order, and the door to the outbuilding flew open. Not Richter, but one of his burly trainers confronted her. "Can I help you, madam? This area is off limits." Before Greta could feign disorientation, Richter himself appeared in the doorway, his eyes like chips of ice. He saw Greta, her expensive clothes, her feigned surprise, and something flickered in his eyes. Suspicion, then cold, dawning realization. "You!" He snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. "Who are you, really?" He lunged for her, his hand outstretched towards the camera button. At that exact moment, Wilhelm, having anticipated Richter might be alerted, executed his desperate pre-planned diversion. His ancient Opel, parked discreetly down a service lane that ran close to that section of the fence, suddenly backfired with a series of deafening reports, followed by a plume of thick, acrid smoke from a smoke bomb he'd ignited under the hood. He then laid on the horn, a continuous, piercing blare. The commotion was immediate. Shouts erupted from the main compound. Richter hesitated, torn between dealing with Greta and the chaos outside. That hesitation was all Greta needed. She activated the distress signal on her phone, a discreet double tap, and stepped back shouting, "Fire! There's a fire!" The diversion, coupled with Greta's cry, drew staff towards the supposed emergency. Richter, momentarily distracted, cursed. As sirens wailed in the distance, Miller's team responding to the signal, he made a last desperate grab for Greta's camera, but it was too late. Uniformed officers led by Detective Miller were already streaming onto the property. Richter froze, trapped. The game was over. Miller, her face grim, approached him. "Klaus Richter, you are under arrest for suspected violations of the Animal Welfare Act." The damning footage from Greta's camera was already being secured. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. Schwartz K9 Tactical was officially sealed pending a full investigation. The dogs on site, over 30 of them, including the traumatized Malinois from the outbuilding, were carefully removed by animal welfare officers and transported to shelters and specialized rescue organizations. Some were aggressive, some were shut down with fear. All bore the invisible and sometimes visible scars of Richter's brutal regime. Their journey to rehabilitation would be long and arduous. Klaus Richter's arrest, fueled by Greta's shocking footage and Leo Meyer's now formal, courageous testimony, became front-page news in Hamburg. The story of Der brutale Hundetrainer von Hamburg, the brutal dog trainer of Hamburg, ignited public outrage. Wilhelm's role and the story of Fritz the Wunderhund miracle dog, who had inadvertently sparked the investigation, captured hearts. Donations poured into Hamburg Animal Voice and other animal protection groups. There were calls for stricter regulations and oversight of dog training facilities. The legal proceedings against Richter were complex and lengthy. His expensive lawyers tried every trick, but the evidence was overwhelming. Months later, Klaus Richter was convicted on multiple counts of animal cruelty and operating an unlicensed training regime that systematically abused animals. His license to own or train animals was permanently revoked, and he received a significant prison sentence. Justice, though slow, had prevailed. For Wilhelm and Fritz, life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Fritz, though the slight tremor in his neck remained a permanent reminder of his ordeal, blossomed in the warmth and security of Wilhelm's home. He learned to play, to trust, to offer sloppy kisses. He became a beloved, if slightly wobbly, local celebrity on his walks with Wilhelm and Gustav. He was no longer the stupid dog, but Wilhelm's cherished companion, a symbol of resilience. Wilhelm found a renewed sense of purpose. He volunteered at the shelter that had taken in some of Richter's dogs, offering his calm presence and gentle touch to animals recovering from trauma. He became an unassuming advocate for compassionate training methods. Greta Schiller's Hamburg animal voice, bolstered by public support and funding, was able to expand its efforts, helping more animals in need. Leo Meyer, finally free from his fear, started studying to become a veterinary technician, determined to dedicate his life to helping animals. One crisp autumn evening, Wilhelm sat on his balcony, a blanket over his knees, Gustav snoring softly at his feet. Fritz lay beside him, his head resting on Wilhelm's lap, his dark eyes looking up with unwavering affection. Wilhelm gently stroked the soft fur behind his ears, feeling the familiar faint tremor. "You're not stupid, man, Fritz," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my brave boy, my warrior." Fritz responded with a contented sigh and a thump of his tail. In the quiet sanctuary of an old man's love, the beaten for being stupid German Shepherd pup had finally found his voice, his worth, and his forever home. The echoes of the dark alley had faded, replaced by the gentle sounds of peace.